Good morning, delegates at KohaCon 22. Great to see so many of you there on the room cam. My name is Andrew Preater. I'm Director of Library Services at the University of West London, London, England. And Tundun, if you want to introduce yourself.
So my name is Tundun Folami, and I'm the Systems Librarian at the University of West London.
Thanks, Tundun. So just a brief outline of what we want to cover today. It's in two parts where I say something about strategy, philosophy and strategic aspects of free software. And then Tundun will talk about our practical experiences and about professional development for library systems workers. Just for brevity, simplicity, I'm going to refer to free software. I know other terms are available. We're using the acronym FOSS, F-O-S-S, but I would just call it free software. So thinking about our values and principles, we would argue, and in the political aspects as well, there is huge overlap between free software and open access. Within the domain of software, free software represents a free cultural work. In the domain of higher education and research and scholarship, OA is the equivalent, open access is the equivalent free cultural work. And we're using here the definition from the Freedom Defined Wiki. This is referenced by Creative Commons, amongst others, and it's quite similar definition really to the GNU Project's 4 freedoms for software. It includes the freedom to use and perform works, to study works, to redistribute copies, and to distribute derived works. That point about derivative works actually is a sticking point really for open access. And one reason the use of the less free Creative Commons licenses like no derivatives or non-commercial under the umbrella of open access in research is so problematic. We consider that this licensing means that OA and free software are part of a larger knowledge commons. That's to say that they are a cultural resource available, in theory, at least, to all in society. Library workers, I'm sure, like many of us in this room, advocate, would practically facilitate open access in our work in research support, in scholarly communications, and we are enthusiastic to the point of sometimes being dismissed as cheerleaders for OA by those critical of open access movement. So OA is something that's been with us for a long time. Obviously, free software dates back quite a long time to the 80s, where it was born in higher education. But long experience shows there's a relative reticence really towards free software in our libraries. There's a lack of bold action in this space in our libraries. And obviously I leave aside friends and colleagues in this room who have implemented Koha. But certainly it's something where we see quite a lot of interesting perceptions. So I just want to alight on some of those perceptions here. These are some narrative comments from Marshall Breeding's Library Perceptions Survey, 2022 edition. And Marshall asked specifically about attitudes to free software. Actually, I think the survey terms it open source, but I mean free software. It's fascinating, the stuff that comes through here. Rare example, really, of a situation where you should read the comments. And the key beliefs really, they tend to be themed in 3 or 4 different areas. Inevitably, it's that free software means it's self-hosted. You're going to run it on your own hardware, probably on premises. You're going to develop it yourself. You're going to hack on the code base yourself. And those things really combined together mean you would need a large team, whether it's a large IT team or a library systems team with particular specialist knowledge. Marshall says that these narrative comments suggest that due to a perception that there's a need for more staff with particular technical skills. And to be fair, I think these comments are the same every year in the perception survey. They haven't really changed since my first job when I worked in higher education as an IT technician in 2004. I've heard the same things year in, year out, to be honest. They're pretty stable, even as cloud hosting and infrastructure as a service. And nowadays, anything as a service really has become more and more dominant. These perceptions stay with us. And we want to subvert some of these perceptions in talking about free software. There's a really interesting one, the second one down, about avoiding open source based on many past experiences. And I'll come back to that idea of many past experiences in a minute. So we advocated for, we selected and implemented Koha, supported by PTFS Europe in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. And my first point about selecting a free software system is we did not set out to purchase a free software system. When we wrote a business case for this migration with the management team here, we focused on the benefits we anticipated in migrating. And we expected a free software system would compete fairly against any other system on the market. Our second point, though, for the business case was about risk mitigation. So we included in our business case points about risk mitigation based on experience with non-free software. I've linked here to our risk appetite statement that the university has. As a publicly funded institution, universities in England all have this kind of statement explaining their approach and attitude to risk. University of West London has a low risk appetite around activity that affects students' educational experiences, unsurprising really for a university. But we do also recognize that if you are overly risk averse, that can lead to failure to maximize opportunities that present themselves, and sometimes an inability to act decisively in the face of changes in the external environment. So that like risk aversion can actually, we view that as a potential threat in many ways as well. So non-free or closed source software, we would say it has, in our experience, present various risks institutionally. Primarily things around vendor lock-in. An attitude of vendor lock-in can lead to complacency for certain suppliers. A tendency for product roadmaps to be quite aspirational and not necessarily deliver things that we actually need and are promised. And indeed, hidden costs for work that is out of scope of the support contract, or for hidden costs when you're offboarding, for when you do actually want to leave that supplier. So those are the key risks that we seek to mitigate in going with free software. Finally, financials, and I know it's money, but we can't avoid this element. We are a publicly funded university. In England, we have the sector regulator, and they expect we deliver value for money to the taxpayer and to students who pay fees. So for our regulator, aspects like private equity shareholders, dividends are not really a key concern. They're interested in value for money to the taxpayer. In terms of total cost of ownership, this is a spectacular number, really, or contract value for free software versus closed source. We have saved about 79% of the cost of the product over the contract lifecycle by going with Koha. So I mean, 79% is really, in my opinion, is really impressive. So these are the key things we sought to get. And as I say, we didn't seek to implement free software. We sought the best thing that would meet our needs in our business case. Having said that, I've got a little gift for you in the spirit of Koha being a gift to the community. It doesn't mean we ignored free software or licensing. We actually asked about it early on in the procurement process and our tendering process for a new system. And this is something you can share with your library friends about how to include software licensing questions in a procurement document. We've asked here, we framed it in terms of the benefits to the supplier themselves. So we asked our suppliers, potential suppliers on the market, can you license your software to your customers under the same terms that you enjoy yourself? So that means if they've got stuff in there that's licensed under, for example, an Apache license or MIT style licenses, which are very permissive and can be closed, made into a closed source product, we ask if they're willing to give us the same benefit that they enjoy themselves. So answering no to that isn't a deal breaker for us, but the answers from suppliers who do use that software and then close it and sell it can be quite revealing. And it said something to us quite interesting about the supplier's attitudes to power. Now, that's my point. That's my strategy point. I'd just like to hand over now to Tundun. Would you like to take over?
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the practical implementation of Koha at the university, implementing Koha at UWL was actually my first experience of going through a library systems change. And there were several notable positives I took away from the project. One being that the support from PTFS Europe was obviously very helpful during the project, but especially regarding the data extraction near the beginning of the project from our legacy system, Capita ESS, especially since we were quoted over £22,000. So that's around $25,000 by our previous NMS provider to extract our data from our previous system. They were also very helpful during the initial testing phase. So once our data was loaded into our test and then our live system. Another positive is that working through the data extraction ourselves with support from PTFS, as opposed to having our previous provider do this work, allowed us to get to know our data really, really well, which would prove especially beneficial for me going forward as a systems librarian in our team. And the fact that we were working remotely also made it easier to interact well with PTFS. So overall, it was a great learning experience. I gained more networking knowledge on top of other things than I anticipated, and experienced the benefits of working with an open source system from implementation and getting to customize the settings on a more detailed level from the beginning. There were also, however, some notable challenges that the implementation presented. So the biggest one was that we migrated systems during the national lockdown period of 2020. So in the UK, this was a complete lockdown between March and October 2020, and on-site access to university was only for essential reasons. A particular challenge this presented for us was that we could only test the circulation settings as it pertained to how the kiosks and the sorter, for example, were working post-migration, only up to a certain extent until we were allowed back on campus. Also, our previous LMS could only be accessed via VPN when we were working from home. But even this VPN access still didn't give us access to the reporting module we used in the previous system, which is how we were planning to extract the data from the legacy system. Our IT team eventually found a workaround that allowed their team to be able to access the system via a spare PC we had on site. But this delay meant that we were more pressed for time when it came to testing with the data in the new system. We also experienced delays from our vendors, and this was obviously factored into the equation, but we had to wait quite a bit longer than expected, especially for our reading list and discovery system vendors, even after we went live with koha. But the biggest takeaway for me post-implementation is just how much control our team has over the new system. So even though PTFS Europe manages the system for us on the database level, we can still make decisions as a library and then go into koha, into the administration module, and adjust settings to improve our workflows. We also have a more hands-on approach more generally, for example, when it comes to reporting on data in koha, managing the circulation rules and managing budgets from within the acquisitions module, for example. And in the next slide, I will discuss how using koha has allowed me to continue to develop professionally. So the collaborative nature of koha has meant that I've been able to find a wide breadth of video tutorials and articles from other users around the world to help me understand the system better as we continue to work to optimize it for our institution. And being a part of the koha community has allowed me to work with other systems librarians in the UK and the wider community abroad to resolve issues while we use koha and make adjustments in the system. A recent example of this is when I was talking with a systems librarian at another university here in London, and they were using a previous version of koha. So I was discussing with them some connectivity problems we were having following an upgrade. And when we eventually resolved the problem at UWL, I was able to discuss what worked with us with them, and they were prepared to deal with any potential issues related to that after they upgraded to the same version. And frequent engagement in the koha community, through speaking directly to other koha users and other institutions, testing patches, joining mailing lists, and lurking and eventually speaking in the koha IRC chat has given me varied avenues to develop my knowledge of the koha and share ideas. And outside of the community, one of the best ways that I've learnt about Koa is by playing around in our test environment and adjusting settings to see what happens, or until I break something and I have to fix it. I did a lot of this before we loaded the data into our live system to test how certain circulation rules or system preferences would affect user accounts. And even after going live with Koa, playing around in the test environment has helped me to come up with ways to resolve issues that we've come across as we go through upgrades and continue to implement new policies. Having more control over the system has also enabled me to develop my SQL knowledge and allowed me to provide reports for the wider library team. So with our previous system, we would have to raise tickets most of the time in order to get specific data from the system we wanted. But now I can just go in there and have a play myself. And lastly, being the main person looking after Koa in my team has allowed me to develop the skills needed to explain complex or technical issues within the system in a clear way to my colleagues in the library services team. And this in turn has forced me to better understand more complex issues that occur in the system.
Okay, and I think our next slide is just our references, because we are librarians. But Tundun, I just wanted to reflect actually on that point you said about how it's, how a lot of what we do as systems librarians or library technologists is framed around that idea of going in and breaking something, seeing what happens, and learning the system that way. But of course, with free software, it's essentially an unlimited potential, isn't it, for that learning experience? So versus a closed system, there is just that much more for us to actually learn and understand about the inner workings of our library management system or ILS.
Yeah, so I think that's probably been at the beginning. I felt like a baptism of fire almost when we switched to Koa, but I think ultimately that was the best way for me to learn. You're right, just going in there and having a go first and then figuring out how to resolve issues. So yeah, that's been really beneficial for me.
Okay, so colleagues in the room, this is our final slide. We have left a bit of time at the end here for questions. There's our contact info if you would like to get in touch with us or follow us over on the Bird app. I'm not sure how questions are working in this sort of hybrid environment. So are there questions from the room?
Yeah, any questions? Yep, we've got one. Hold on just a moment while I get to the mic.
Hi, I was just wondering, what were some of the biggest surprises that you had in the process of migration, and how did you handle those?
Okay, so there's surprises in the process of systems migration. Tundun, is that mainly a question for you?
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of touched on it briefly when I was presenting my slides, but I think the amount of networking knowledge that I would have, that I kind of gained just from having to liaise with our IT team and the library team during the upgrade. There was quite a few things I had to learn as I was going along, just so I'd be able to communicate back to the library team about, oh yeah, this is what's happening, this is where we're at with the migration at this point. So I think, yeah, it was a lot of learning while things were happening, just so I'd be able to let everybody else know what exactly was going on. So yeah, I think I was surprised by how much of the more way technical stuff I had to pick up as I was going along. But yeah, it was a good way to learn.
So I suppose just to comment on that from a more strategic point of view, of my experience as my role was as the project sponsor or project executive. And I think one thing that did surprise me actually was just how quickly and efficiently we did this migration. We did it in did it in a really tight time scale. We had to cut over to our new system at the end of our financial year for various university finance reasons and just around year end. So we had a very hard deadline of the 31st of July, and we actually completed it about a week or so early. So I was really impressed, actually, pleasantly surprised, I think you'd say, with the efficiency of PTFS Europe as a support company. Quite different from some experiences I've had with software suppliers of closed source, and a very highly authentic approach to their work as a system support company.
Any other questions?
This isn't a question, but there's some comments on the YouTube feed, mostly people saying that they agree that there's no greater way to learn about Koha than to go into a test system. And I personally commented there's no greater motivation for figuring out how to fix something in Koha than going in and breaking it yourself.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I certainly reflect that's been similar experience in my career previously as a systems librarian. Is there anything you wanted to comment around that to do?
Yeah, just that I agree. Especially, yeah, exactly. The motivation to fix something after you break it. I felt that, because obviously I'd have to explain why something is the way it is. So yeah, that's been great.
I can just add to that, being in Koha is a great experience because you're more hands-on with the system than you would be with a paid system, and so it's a great experience, and it does give you more knowledge of your system than you would with any other product.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew Tundun, thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate your time, and thank you for I don't know what time it is there, but thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's afternoon here, so we'll say good afternoon, colleagues, and we will be on the live stream enjoying the rest of the day.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.